I had triple-checked the itinerary before I left the house. Printed copies, confirmation numbers, even a small pouch for my passport and boarding pass. I'd bought a new pair of sandals that wouldn't rub a sun hat I never wore, and 3 books I probably wouldn't finish. The suitcase rolled behind me with a soft thud every few feet as I walked toward the terminal. I was early, always am, and I thought maybe I'd surprise them with coffee while we waited. Then my phone buzzed. Change of plans. Patricia's mom is coming instead. It's just for family. Nolan. I reread the message. Once then, twice. My hand stilled on the suitcase handle. I looked around, unsure if I was misunderstanding something, but when I turned toward the boarding ramp, I saw them. Nolan had his arm around Patricia, both of them laughing. Her mother stood beside them in a coral dress and heels that didn't belong anywhere near a boat deck. They were posing for a picture taken by one of the staff. Nolan waved at the camera, smiling, then disappeared into the ship's entrance with the others. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and looked through me. I stood there for a while, not moving, just breathing. There wasn't a scene to make. No one to shout at. No explanation to demand. It was already done. I stepped to the side and sat on a low bench facing the water. The breeze caught the edge of the boarding pass, still peeking from my pouch. I folded it in half and tucked it away. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I sat there and watched the ship pull away from the dock. The ocean looked flat, quiet. You'd never know a storm had just passed through me. When I got home, I poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen. The silence there wasn't new. But this time, it felt different, like something had shifted, like I'd left something behind on that pier and picked up something heavier in its place. I opened the drawer by the fridge and pulled out the file. The folder with the cruise documents went straight to the bottom drawer of my desk underneath old utility bills and recipes I never use. I didn't look at it again. I just closed the drawer slowly, the way you do when something inside is too sharp to touch. I made tea, though I didn't drink it, sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the chair across from me. For years, that chair had been Nolan's after school, after college, even after he and Patricia moved into the house. The house I bought. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The down payment came from my annuity. The renovations from my emergency savings. The mortgage I'd taken over when Nolan lost hours at work. Just for a few months, he said, until we get back on track. 2 years later, I paid the final installment. No party. No thank you. I reached into the side drawer by the fridge and pulled out the folder. The deed was still there, folded neatly in a plastic sleeve. My name at the top, only mine. They never refinanced, never changed it, never mentioned it again. The water bill sat unopened beside it, addressed to me. So did the property tax notice, the trash collection statement, the gas service. All quietly routed to my email, auto-paid from my account. I covered the foundations so they could live above them, free and undisturbed. They were probably sipping champagne right now. Maybe on the deck, maybe watching the sunset. Patricia's mother would be holding court. Nolan would be telling himself it was harmless, just a switch in plans. They'd call it a misunderstanding if I brought it up. Say it wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. And I was done explaining why. I set the folder on the table and opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over the name I hadn't used in years. Marcelo Reyes, attorney. I pressed call, then stood up to get my notebook from the shelf, the one where I kept records of everything, payments, transfers, promises. By the time he picked up, I already knew what I needed to ask. I logged into the credit card portal just after sunrise. The cruise charge sat at the top of the transaction list, bold and smug. Room meals activities, spa packages, extra excursions, all confirmed. All booked under my name. I clicked dispute, then cancel, then locked the card entirely. No note, no warning, no confrontation. I imagined the looks on their faces when the hotel key stopped working or the dinner reservation bounced. But I didn't linger there. That wasn't the point. I had a meeting with a realtor 2 hours later. She asked if I wanted to stage the place or sell it as is. I told her I just wanted it gone. When I arrived at the house, their house, everything was exactly in its place, and yet nothing felt familiar. The spare key still worked. The alarm code hadn't changed. The smell of air freshener hit me before I reached the kitchen. A candle burned on the island labeled something generic and clean. All the family photos were gone. Not just mine, all of them. No pictures on the hallway wall, no frames on the mantel. Even the small one I had left in the guest room of Nolan as a boy tucked behind a lamp was missing. There was a folder on the counter, titled Future Transfer. Inside were printed documents, titles, financing, pre-approvals, even a drafted deed. My name wasn't on any of them. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. Upstairs, I walked from room to room, noting furniture, appliances, items worth moving, items worth donating. The house echoed more than I remembered. Maybe because my presence had been slowly peeled away layer by layer until I was a guest in the space I'd built. I opened the linen closet and found the towels I'd bought last Christmas. Still in plastic. I moved them to the donation pile. Downstairs, the realtor waited. She didn't ask questions. She handed me a clipboard. I signed where she pointed. Back in my car, I exhaled slowly, then reached for my phone. The mover's number was next on my list. The offer came the next morning. Full asking price. Cash. No contingencies. They wanted to close by Friday. I told the realtor yes before she even finished the sentence. I didn't flinch, not once. The next 3 days moved like clockwork. I called the movers and asked for a small team, just enough to help me separate what belonged to me from what didn't. I pointed to the hallway closet, the front bedroom, the garage shelves. These can go, I said. The rest was theirs. Boxes labeled Nolan and Patricia, stacked quickly in the corner of the garage. I didn't bother with bubble wrap. I folded her dresses the way I would have wanted mine folded. I set aside a few of the children's toys, unsure if they were wanted or just left behind. A donation truck came for the furniture. I watched the sofa disappear out the front door, then the coffee table, then the wine rack I never used, but bought anyway, because Patricia liked the look of it. When I peeled the photo stickers off the fridge, there were no marks underneath. No shadows, no outlines. It was as if nothing had ever been there. By the time I finished, the house echoed with the sound of shoes on bare floor. I sat at the kitchen counter with a pen and a notepad. The words didn't come all at once, but they came. You needed a trip without me. I need a life without permission. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't meant to hurt. It was just the truth. I folded the letter and taped it to the fridge just under the empty magnet. No name, no signature. Just that one line. I closed the front door behind me and turned the new key in the new lock. For the first time in years, the house wasn't mine to worry about. And it wasn't theirs to take for granted. The next morning, I opened my laptop and searched for rentals along the coast. They must have landed late the night before because by morning, the texts had started. One from Nolan. Hey, the garage code isn't working. Another an hour later. Did something happen? Call me. I didn't reply. By afternoon, the calls began. I turned my phone face down on the counter and let it ring. Across town, they stood in front of what used to be their home. The driveway was empty, the porch bare. The hanging planter Patricia had chosen was gone. So were the cushions from the bench. Nolan tried the garage keypad. Patricia tried the front door. Neither worked. She shouted first sharp and immediate the way she always did when things didn't go her way. Nolan dialed again, pacing. Eventually, he walked around to the side entrance where I'd always kept the spare key. He found the lockbox gone. The realtor had left the new owner's welcome folder just inside the entry, but on the fridge, taped in place with the last remaining magnet, was the note. He read it once, then again. His hands started to tremble. You needed a trip without me. I need a life without permission. She sold the house. Patricia's voice cracked at the edges. She took the letter and read it aloud, like a charge in court, as though saying it louder might undo what had already been done. Her mother, standing behind them with a suitcase, frowned and asked, "Wait, wasn't this house in her name?" Nolan didn't answer. The silence inside that living room bare, now stripped to floorboards and empty walls, said more than either of them could manage. He sat on the staircase where the family photos used to hang, looked up and saw nothing. No frames, no echoes, just blank space. Patricia tried calling again. Then her mother. Then they all stood there, waiting for someone to explain what had happened. But no one came. No one owed them a moment more than they'd given. While they stood there, I was already settling into my new place by the coast quay in hand. Windows open to the sea. The studio was smaller than anything I'd lived in before, but it felt more like home than the house ever did. One room, one window, and a door that locked from the inside. The landlord had painted the walls a pale cream before I moved in. It smelled like new beginnings, or maybe just fresh paint. I unpacked slowly. One plate, one mug, 2 sets of sheets. My entire life fit into 4 boxes, and that was enough. The realtor had wired the payment from the sale, and for the first time in decades, my bank account held more than fear. There was a small desk by the window, and I turned it into a workspace. I bought a few brushes, a set of paints, a stack of canvases. I hadn't painted since Nolan was born. Back then, I told myself I didn't have the time. But maybe I just didn't think I was allowed to take any. Days passed quietly. I learned the rhythm of the place, the grocer's bell in the morning, the muffled voices from the cafe below the sound of the tide if I left the window open at night. No visitors, no plans. It was a silence that didn't ache. Nolan called 3 days after they came home. I let it ring. He called again the next morning. I watched the phone buzz until it stopped. On the 3rd call, I picked up. "You could have talked to us," he said. His voice was strained, softer than I remembered. "You could have warned me." I looked out the window. The paint on my canvas was still wet. "You didn't warn me when you left me standing at the dock." He didn't respond. I heard him exhale, then the faint sound of Patricia's voice in the background before the line went dead. I turned the phone face down, picked up the brush, and finished the horizon I'd started painting earlier that morning. The next day, an envelope from Patricia arrived in my mailbox. The invitation came folded into polite language. "We'd love to see you. Just talk. Make peace." Patricia signed the card in looping cursive, and Nolan's name was printed beneath it, smaller like an afterthought. I almost tossed it in the bin, but something in me wanted to see their eyes when they tried to smooth it all over. The condo was barely furnished, white walls, gray rugs, furniture that looked expensive and unbothered. It wasn't a home, it was a placeholder. Patricia greeted me like she was hosting a fundraiser. Air kisses, flat compliments, hands too cold. "You look so refreshed," she said. "City life must agree with you." She poured sparkling water into wine glasses and gestured to the dining table. The salad was overdressed and underseasoned. She called it artisanal. I called it decorative. Nolan sat across from me, fork in hand, gaze low. He hadn't spoken yet. "We all made mistakes," Patricia said lightly, as if it were a group project we failed together. We were all tired. The cruise wasn't even that relaxing, to be honest. I nodded. I'd heard enough. She moved quickly to Nolan's promotion, some regional position, more meetings, more stress. She mentioned their new babysitter, then glanced at me with a softened expression. "Maybe you'd want to see the kids more. We could work something out, a routine. Maybe even a family cruise next year, this time all together." I set my fork down and met her eyes. "Family looks different now." The words didn't rise like anger. They settled like truth. Nolan looked up, but didn't speak. Patricia's smile tightened. Her mother wasn't there this time, but her presence still lingered in every polished surface of the room. I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and leaned back. I wasn't angry, just full of clarity, full of quiet, full of the space that opened when someone finally stopped pretending. I asked if I could take the kids for a weekend soon, just us. A museum, maybe. Something small. Patricia hesitated, then nodded. I smiled. I already knew which weekend I wanted. I sent the message the next morning. Clear and brief. I'd love to spend time with the kids, just the kids. No big plans. No elaborate meals or group photos. Just a weekend away at the coast, an art retreat I found that catered to children. Patricia replied within minutes. Don't you think it's better if we all go? It's important for them to see unity. I didn't answer that one right away. Nolan followed up later with a softer tone. I think it could be good for them, he wrote. Just let me know the details. When I confirmed the dates, I made one thing clear. No parents, no pop-ins, no shared schedules. I'd bring them back Sunday evening. You made decisions without me, I told them over the phone. This one's mine. They didn't argue again. Friday afternoon, I waited outside their new condo. The children ran out first, Leah, with her backpack bouncing behind her, Milo holding a crumpled drawing he insisted on showing me. Patricia handed off a list of snacks and bedtime routines. Nolan stood a step behind her, hands in his pockets. No one mentioned the cruise. The weekend unfolded in quiet, familiar rhythms. We painted shells in the morning, built sand castles in the afternoon. Leah asked if we could make a wind chime, so we collected driftwood and bottle caps, stringing them together with bits of ribbon from my art bag. Milo painted a picture of a boat with 3 windows. Was it like the cruise, he asked, holding up the drawing. I smiled and handed him another brush. I took a different trip. We walked back up the hill to the little cottage, sand stuck to our shoes and paint still drying on our fingers. That night, they both fell asleep on the pull-out couch, while I read aloud from a chapter book I used to keep by Nolan's bed. I cleaned up the art supplies, folded the blankets, and watched them breathe in tandem, siblings, in sleep safe and still. Sunday evening, I drove them home. Nolan opened the door before I knocked. It was early evening when the knock came. I almost didn't answer. Most people who visited this building were lost or selling something. But when I looked through the window, I saw Nolan on the landing, a manila envelope in his hands. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. Just stepped through the doorway quietly, like someone entering a place that still felt sacred. I found these, he said, holding out the envelope, in one of the storage boxes from the old house. I thought they were gone. Inside were photographs, some faded, some torn at the corners. Me and his father at a state park, both sunburned and laughing. Baby Nolan on my lap, cheeks round and eyes bright. Me standing in front of a classroom, chalk on my sleeve. A life I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined. He sat down on the small stool near my easel. I forgot what you gave up, he said softly. For me. For all of us. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. He looked around the room, taking in the canvases, the brushes and jars, the smell of turpentine that clung to everything. You seem different here, he said. Lighter. I said. He rubbed his palms together, searching for something else to say. Why didn't you fight harder? To stay in our lives, I did, I said. I fought by walking away. It was the only thing left they couldn't take. He stared at the floor, his shoulders dropping. I didn't understand then. I know. We didn't speak for a long time after that. He just sat there. The photos spread between us, the quiet of the room settling in like an old friend. When he finally stood, he reached out and touched the corner of a canvas, careful not to smudge it. She looks happy, he said. She is, I told him. He nodded once, then left without saying goodbye. The next morning I woke to the sound of the sea and the sudden idea of painting something new. The cottage wasn't much, but it was enough. One bedroom, a narrow porch, and a view of the bay that caught the afternoon light just right. The yard sloped gently toward the water, and there was a rusted hook for a wind chime already hanging near the door like someone had been waiting for me to arrive. I paid in full. No mortgage, no co-signers, no names but mine on the papers. The first weekend after I moved in, I invited the kids for a picnic. Leah brought a paper crown she'd made, declared herself queen of sandwiches, and assigned Milo to carry napkins and juice boxes. We sat under the small tree in the yard, our plates on a blanket, our laughter rising with the breeze. Later, we hung the wind chime together, seashells, driftwood bits of ribbon, and bottle caps from our retreat. It clinked softly as we stepped back to admire its sunlight, catching the edges. Nolan arrived late, holding a box of bakery tarts. He lingered near the fence, not quite stepping into the yard. I waved without standing. He nodded and set the box on the table by the porch, his eyes tracking the children as they raced along the grass. He didn't try to join. He didn't need to. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch steps, the breeze catching my sleeve. The sound of the chimes blended with the children's voices, the distant call of gulls, the soft rush of water along the shore. This wasn't revenge. No doors slammed. No speeches delivered. Just a life that belonged fully to me. A life I hadn't borrowed or built to please someone else. No permission asked. No place earned through sacrifice. I watched Milo chase Leah around the oak tree and felt the fullness of a moment that asked for nothing in return. The chimes sang again as a breeze moved through, and I leaned back on my hands, letting the day settle around me like something I could finally keep.